In the gentle twilight of history, where shadows dance softly across the pages of time, we find ourselves drawn to one of England's most fascinating monarchs. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, ruled with an iron will and a brilliant mind. Yet, like all people of her era, she lived in a world vastly different from our own. Tonight, as we settle into this quiet exploration, we shall journey back to the 16th century, when the very notion of cleanliness held meanings we can barely imagine today. The year is 1558, and a young woman of 25 ascends to the throne of England. Elizabeth Tudor, with her pale skin and fiery red hair, would become one of history's most celebrated rulers. Yet beneath the glittering facade of royal life lay practices that would make even the hardiest among us pause in wonder. These were not failings of character, but rather the accepted customs of an age when medical knowledge was limited and superstition ruled supreme. As we embark on this gentle journey through time, let us remember that we observe these practices not with judgment, but with the curious eyes of historians seeking to understand a world so different from our own. The soft candlelight of Elizabeth's era illuminates customs that seem strange to us now yet were perfectly normal to those who lived there. In the hushed corridors of 16th-century palaces, where tapestries whispered secrets and servants moved like ghosts, hygiene followed rules that would seem alien to our modern sensibilities. The first of these fascinating practices involves the Queen's relationship with water itself. In Elizabeth's time, bathing was not the daily ritual we know today, but rather an occasional event, sometimes separated by months of time. The Queen herself was known to bathe, perhaps once every few months, and this was actually considered quite frequent for a person of her status. Water was viewed with deep suspicion by the medical authorities of the day, who believed that frequent bathing could weaken the body's natural defenses and invite disease. Imagine, if you will, the Queen's private chambers, on a cold winter morning in Greenwich Palace. The stone walls held the chill despite the roaring fires, and the very thought of immersing oneself in water seemed not just uncomfortable, but potentially dangerous. Elizabeth's physicians warned her that too much bathing could open the pores and allow harmful vapors to enter the body. This medical wisdom, passed down through generations, seemed as solid as stone to those who lived by it. When Elizabeth did bathe, it was an elaborate affair involving heated water carried by numerous servants, perfumed oils, and careful attention to the temperature and timing. The Queen would often delay these sessions, finding excuses to postpone what many of her contemporaries considered an unnecessary and potentially harmful activity. Her ladies-in-waiting would sometimes whisper among themselves about the difficulty of convincing their mistress to take to the water, but they understood her reluctance in the context of their time. The Queen's bathing chamber, when it was finally prepared, would be filled with the soft glow of candles and the gentle steam of heated water. Rose petals might float on the surface, and herbs believed to have protective properties would be added to ward off the evil humors that water was thought to invite. The entire process was conducted with great ceremony, as if the Queen were performing a ritual that required careful balance between cleanliness and safety. Even when Elizabeth did bathe, the process was brief and efficient. The prevailing wisdom suggested that prolonged exposure to water could soften the skin too much, making it vulnerable to disease. The Queen would emerge quickly from her bath, to be immediately wrapped in heavy linens and seated by a roaring fire to prevent any chill from settling into her bone. This careful choreography of bathing reflected the deep-seated fears about water's potential dangers that permeated Tudor society. The Queen's reluctance to bathe regularly was shared by virtually all of her subjects. From the highest noble to the humblest peasant, water was associated not with cleanliness, but with the spread of plague and pestilence. Rivers and wells were often contaminated, and the connection between clean water and health was not yet understood. In this context, Elizabeth's infrequent bathing was not a personal failing, but a reasonable response to the medical knowledge of her time. Between these rare bathing sessions, the Queen and her ladies relied on other methods to maintain what they considered appropriate cleanliness. Dry cleaning with cloths and the liberal application of perfumes and powders took the place of soap and water. The queen's morning routine might involve the careful wiping down of her body with clean linen cloths, followed by the application of various powders designed to absorb oils and mask any unpleasant odors. The second remarkable hygiene practice of Elizabeth's court involved the use of cosmetics that would horrify modern dermatologists. The queen's famous pale complexion, so admired in her time, was maintained through the daily application of a lead-based white paint called ceruse. This deadly mixture, known as spirits of Saturn, contained white lead and vinegar, creating a smooth, porcelain-like finish that was considered the height of beauty and fashion. Each morning, in the soft light filtering through the queen's private chambers, her ladies would carefully apply this toxic paste to Elizabeth's face, neck and hands. The process was meditative and slow, requiring great skill to achieve the desired effect. The lead-based makeup would be applied in thin, even layers, building up to create the ghostly pale complexion that became Elizabeth's signature look. The ladies worked in hushed concentration, understanding the importance of their task in maintaining the queen's public image. The application of ceruse was not merely cosmetic, but carried deep symbolic meaning in Tudor society. Pale skin indicated noble birth, and a life spent indoors, away from the sun-darkening labor of the common people. The whiter the skin, the higher the social status, and Elizabeth's alabaster complexion proclaimed her divine right to rule as surely as her crown proclaimed her royal authority. The lead paint served, not just to beautify, but to reinforce the social hierarchy that kept the Tudor monarchy in power. But ceruse came with a terrible price that was not yet understood by the queen or her physicians. The lead slowly poisoned those who used it regularly, causing symptoms that ranged from mild discomfort to severe illness. Elizabeth likely suffered from lead poisoning throughout much of her adult life, experiencing hair loss, tooth decay, and possibly the mood swings and paranoia that marked her later years. Yet the connection between the beautiful white makeup and these health problems remained hidden in the shadows of 16th century medical ignorance. The queen's daily application of lead makeup was accompanied by other toxic beauty treatments that seem shocking by today's standard. Mercury-based preparations were used to treat skin blemishes, and various plant-based dyes contained heavy metals and poisonous compounds. Elizabeth's pursuit of beauty, guided by the fashion standards of her time, essentially involved the systematic poisoning of her own body, day after day, year after year. The process of removing the lead-based makeup each night was almost as dangerous as applying it. Harsh scrubbing with rough cloths and strong solvents was required to strip away the day's accumulation of ceruse. This nightly ritual left the queen's skin raw and irritated, creating a cycle of damage and covering that continued throughout her reign. The removal process often took place by candlelight, adding an eerie quality to the already unsettling routine of scraping away the day's toxic beauty treatments. Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting, who were also expected to maintain pale complexions, shared in this dangerous beauty regimen. The queen's chambers would often be filled with the soft sounds of women applying and removing their lead-based makeup, creating a sisterhood bound together by shared suffering in the name of beauty. These women understood that their appearance was not merely personal vanity, but a crucial component of the court's political theater. The third disturbing hygiene practice of Elizabeth's era involved dental care, or rather the almost complete lack thereof. The queen, like most people of her time, had no understanding of proper dental hygiene, and her teeth suffered accordingly. Sugar, recently introduced to England and extremely expensive, was consumed primarily by the wealthy, and Elizabeth had developed quite a fondness for sweet treats. This love of sugar, combined with the absence of effective dental care, resulted in severe tooth decay and eventual tooth loss. Contemporary accounts describe Elizabeth's teeth as black and rotting, with several teeth missing entirely by the time she reached middle age. Foreign ambassadors visiting the English court would sometimes comment with shock on the queen's dental condition, noting the stark contrast between her magnificent clothing and jewelry and her decaying smile. Yet, in Elizabeth's England, such dental problems were so common among all social classes that they were barely worthy of comment among her own subjects. The queen's approach to dental care involved occasional rinsing with various herbal preparations, but these were more concerned with freshening breath than preventing decay. Toothbrushes were unknown, and the concept of daily teeth cleaning was as foreign as daily bathing. Instead, Elizabeth and her courtiers might chew on aromatic herbs or use small cloths to wipe their teeth, but these practices were irregular and largely ineffective against the ravages of sugar and neglect. When the Queen did experience dental pain, the only solution was extraction, performed without anesthesia by barber surgeons who served as the era's dentists. These procedures were extraordinarily painful and dangerous, often resulting in infection or even death. Elizabeth, understandably, avoided such treatments whenever possible, preferring to endure the discomfort of rotting teeth rather than risk the agony and danger of extraction. Her reluctance meant that dental problems were allowed to progress until they became truly severe. The Queen's dental issues were sometimes addressed through the use of various folk remedies and herbal preparations. Ground herbs might be rubbed on the gums, or painful teeth might be packed with substances believed to have healing properties. These treatments, while well-intentioned, were largely ineffective and sometimes made problems worse. The soft light of candles would illuminate these painful sessions, as Elizabeth's ladies tried their best to provide relief for their suffering mistress. Elizabeth's dental problems affected not only her health, but also her public appearances and speeches. The Queen, known for her eloquent oratory, had to adapt her speaking style to accommodate missing teeth and painful gums. Her pronunciation changed over the years as her dental condition worsened, and she sometimes stuffed cloth into her mouth to fill the gaps left by missing teeth during important public appearances. This ingenious solution allowed her to maintain her royal dignity despite her deteriorating dental health. The impact of Elizabeth's dental problems extended beyond mere physical discomfort. In an age when personal appearance carried enormous political significance, the Queen's rotting teeth represented a vulnerability that her enemies might exploit. Foreign courts, always eager to undermine English prestige, would sometimes circulate unflattering descriptions of Elizabeth's dental condition as a form of diplomatic warfare. The Queen's ladies worked constantly to help their mistress present the best possible appearance. Despite these challenges, the fourth shocking hygiene practice of Elizabeth's court involved the treatment of bodily waste and the primitive sanitation systems of the Tudor era. The Queen's palaces, magnificent as they were, lacked anything resembling modern plumbing or waste management. Instead, the royal household relied on a complex system of chamber pots, privies, and human waste disposal that would seem barbarically primitive by contemporary standards. Elizabeth's personal waste management involved the use of an elaborate chair called a close stool, essentially a portable toilet that could be moved wherever the Queen required privacy. This ornate piece of furniture, upholstered in velvet and trimmed with gold, disguised its humble function behind royal splendor. The Queen's close stool was attended by specially appointed servants whose sole responsibility was maintaining and emptying this crucial piece of royal equipment. These servants, known as grooms of the stool, held positions of surprising importance in the royal hierarchy, as their intimate access to the monarch made them valuable confidants and sources of information. The process of emptying and cleaning the Queen's close stool was a daily ritual performed with great ceremony and discretion. The contents would be carried away in covered pots and disposed of in designated areas within the palace grounds. During Elizabeth's reign, human waste was often simply thrown into rivers or buried in palace gardens, creating unsanitary conditions that contributed to the spread of disease. The Queen's waste, however, was handled with special care, as even this most basic human function was considered to reflect upon royal dignity. The Queen's palaces were filled with the constant movement of servants carrying chamber pots and waste containers, creating a complex choreography of waste management that operated largely unseen by visitors and courtiers. The smell of human waste was a constant presence in royal residences, masked somewhat by the liberal use of herbs, flowers, and perfumes, but never entirely eliminated. Elizabeth and her courtiers learned to live with odors that would be considered intolerable in our modern world. During long court ceremonies or public appearances, when the queen could not easily retire to her private clothes stool, she and her ladies would sometimes rely on portable solutions, hidden beneath their elaborate gowns. Small containers or absorbent materials might be concealed within the folds of court dress, allowing for discreet waste management, even during the most formal occasions. This practical necessity required careful planning and the cooperation of trusted ladies-in-waiting, who could assist with these intimate matters without compromising royal dignity. The winter months presented particular challenges for waste management in Elizabeth's palaces. The cold made trips to outdoor privies extremely unpleasant, and the freezing temperatures could make chamber pots difficult to empty and clean. The queen's apartments would be equipped with multiple clothes stools and chamber pots to provide options during the harshest weather. Servants would work around the clock to maintain these facilities, often working by candlelight in the early morning hours to ensure everything was ready for the queen's use. Travel presented even greater challenges for royal waste management. When Elizabeth embarked on her famous progresses around the kingdom, visiting the homes of various nobles, the logistics of providing appropriate sanitation became enormously complex. Portable clothes stools had to be transported along with the royal household, and suitable facilities had to be prepared at each stop along the journey. The queen's hosts would spend considerable sums ensuring that their homes could provide appropriate waste management facilities worthy of royal use. The fifth and perhaps most disturbing hygiene practice of Elizabeth's era involved the treatment of illness and the primitive medical procedures that passed for healthcare in the 16th century. The queen, despite her royal status, was subject to the same medical ignorance and dangerous treatments that characterized Tudor medicine. When Elizabeth fell ill, she was subjected to procedures that were not only ineffective, but often made her condition worse. Bloodletting was considered one of the most important medical treatments available, and Elizabeth was regularly bled by her physicians to maintain what they believed was the proper balance of bodily humors. The queen would be seated in her private chambers, while physicians used sharp instruments to open veins in her arms, allowing blood to flow into special bowls. The amount of blood removed was often substantial, leaving Elizabeth weak and pale, but her doctors believed this weakness was a sign that the treatment was working effectively. The queen's physicians also employed various purging treatments designed to cleanse her body of harmful substances. These procedures involved the administration of powerful laxatives and emetics that would cause violent vomiting and diarrhea. Elizabeth would endure hours of intense illness as these treatments ran their course, believing that the suffering was necessary for her health. The queen's chambers would become scenes of medieval medical torture, as Elizabeth's body was subjected to treatments that weakened her immune system and damaged her overall health. Various herbal and mineral preparations were also used to treat the queen's ailments, many of which contained toxic substances that caused more harm than good. Mercury was commonly prescribed for a variety of conditions, and Elizabeth likely consumed significant quantities of this poisonous metal throughout her lifetime. Other treatments involved the application of various animal products, including ground animal bones, crushed insects, and even human body parts, all believed to possess healing properties. The queen's medical treatments often took place in her private chambers, attended only by her physicians and most trusted ladies-in-waiting. The soft light of candles would illuminate these sessions as Elizabeth submitted to procedures that seemed barbaric by modern standards. The queen's faith in her physicians was absolute, as she had no alternative source of medical knowledge to guide her choices. She endured painful and dangerous treatments with royal stoicism, believing that her suffering was necessary for her health and the good of the kingdom. When Elizabeth suffered from more serious illnesses, such as the smallpox that nearly killed her in 1562, the medical treatments became even more extreme. The queen was subjected to various heating and cooling treatments, wrapped in multiple layers of clothing and blankets, then suddenly exposed to cold air. Her physicians believed that sudden temperature changes could shock her body back to health, but these treatments likely made her condition worse and prolonged her recovery. The Queen's mental health was also subject to the primitive understanding of Tudor medicine. When Elizabeth experienced periods of depression or anxiety, her physicians prescribed treatments that involved the administration of various mind-altering substances, including preparations containing opium and alcohol. These treatments, while providing temporary relief, often created additional problems, and may have contributed to some of the erratic behavior that marked Elizabeth's later years. As Elizabeth aged, her medical treatments became increasingly desperate and dangerous. Her physicians, faced with the inevitable decline of their royal patient, resorted to ever more extreme measures in their attempts to preserve her health. The Queen was subjected to various experimental treatments involving rare and expensive substances imported from around the world. Many of these treatments were based on superstition rather than medical knowledge, but Elizabeth's faith in her physicians remained strong until the very end of her life. The cumulative effect of a lifetime of poor hygiene practices and dangerous medical treatments took a severe toll on Elizabeth's health and appearance. By the time she reached her later years, the once beautiful Queen had become a shadow of her former self. Her skin, damaged by decades of lead-based makeup, was scarred and prematurely aged. Her teeth were largely gone, and her hair had thinned dramatically, requiring the use of elaborate wigs to maintain her royal appearance. Yet despite these physical challenges, Elizabeth continued to rule with intelligence and determination until her death, and her ability to overcome the limitations imposed by the hygiene practices and medical knowledge of her era speaks to her remarkable strength of character and political skill. The Queen, who had subjected her body to decades of toxic makeup, primitive medical treatments, and poor sanitation, managed to create one of the most successful reigns in English history. The court life that surrounded Elizabeth was similarly affected by the hygiene practices of the era. Her ladies-in-waiting shared many of the same beauty treatments and medical procedures, creating a sisterhood bound together by shared suffering in the name of fashion and health. These women, many of them from noble families, understood that their service to the Queen required them to embrace the same dangerous practices that characterized royal life. The servants who maintained Elizabeth's palaces faced even greater challenges in dealing with the sanitation and hygiene issues of the Tudor era. These hard-working men and women labored constantly to keep the royal residences as clean as possible, given the limitations of their time. They emptied chamber pots, cleaned close stools, and managed the complex systems of waste disposal that kept the court functioning. Their efforts, while heroic, were limited by the technology and knowledge available to them. The visiting diplomats and foreign dignitaries who came to Elizabeth's court often commented on the hygiene practices they observed during their stays. These visitors, representing courts across Europe, understood that the conditions they encountered in England were similar to those found in royal palaces throughout the continent. The hygiene practices that seemed so shocking to modern observers were actually quite typical of aristocratic life in the 16th century. The religious beliefs of Elizabeth's time also influenced attitudes toward hygiene and cleanliness. Many people believed that excessive attention to bodily cleanliness was a form of vanity that distracted from spiritual concerns. The Catholic Church, and later Protestant reformers, taught that the body was temporary, and that focusing on its care was less important than attending to the soul. This religious perspective reinforced the medical beliefs that discouraged frequent bathing and encouraged acceptance of poor hygiene as a normal part of life. The economic factors that influenced hygiene practices in Elizabeth's era were also significant. Even for the wealthy Queen, maintaining good hygiene required enormous resources and labor. The cost of heating water for baths, importing expensive soaps and perfumes, and employing servants to manage sanitation was substantial. For ordinary people, such expenses were simply impossible, making poor hygiene an economic necessity as well as a medical belief. The technological limitations of the Tudor era made good hygiene extremely difficult, even for those who desired. The lack of running water, effective sewage systems, and safe cleaning products created challenges that could not be overcome through wealth or desire alone. Elizabeth's palaces, magnificent as they were, lacked the basic infrastructure that we consider essential for maintaining cleanliness and health. The social customs of Elizabeth's court also reinforced poor hygiene practice. The elaborate clothing worn by courtiers was designed to be worn for extended periods without washing, and the complex hairstyles popular among noble women were meant to be maintained for weeks at a time. These fashion choices, while creating spectacular visual effects, made personal cleanliness extremely difficult and discouraged frequent washing or changing of clothes. The perfumes and cosmetics available to Elizabeth and her courtiers were often more dangerous than the problems they were designed to solve. Many popular beauty treatments contained toxic substances that caused skin damage, hair loss, and internal poison. The Queen's famous white makeup, while creating the desired pale complexion, slowly damaged her skin and may have contributed to various health problems throughout her life. The dining customs of Elizabeth's era also contributed to hygiene problems. Meals were eaten with the hands or simple utensils, and food was often shared from common dishes. The lack of understanding about germs and disease transmission meant that illnesses could spread quickly through the court during mealtimes. Elizabeth's elaborate banquets, while politically important, were also opportunities for disease transmission among the nobility. The heating and lighting systems used in Elizabeth's palaces created additional hygiene challenges. Open fires and candles produced smoke and soot that accumulated on surfaces and clothing, while the lack of effective ventilation meant that odors and airborne particles could not be easily removed. The Queen's apartments, despite their luxury, were often smoky, smelly, and filled with the residue of daily life. The transportation methods available to Elizabeth also affected her hygiene practices. Long journeys by horse or coach, over rough roads and in all weather conditions, made it impossible to maintain cleanliness while traveling. The Queen's famous progresses around her kingdom were magnificent political theater, but they also subjected her to extended periods of poor hygiene as she traveled from one noble residence to another. The clothing worn by Elizabeth and her courtiers was designed more for display than for cleanliness or comfort. The elaborate gowns, with their multiple layers and complex construction, were extremely difficult to clean and were often worn for extended periods without washing. The Queen's famous collection of dresses, numbering in the thousands, was necessitated partly by the difficulty of cleaning such complex garments. The hairstyling practices popular in Elizabeth's court also contributed to hygiene problems. The elaborate wigs and hairpieces worn by noble women were rarely cleaned and often harbored insects and accumulated debris. The Queen's famous red wigs, while creating her distinctive appearance, were maintained through practices that would horrify modern hairstylists. The recreational activities enjoyed by Elizabeth and her court also reflected the hygiene limitations of the era. Hunting, dancing, and outdoor entertainments all created opportunities for dirt and contamination that could not be easily addressed through the cleaning methods available at the time. The Queen's love of outdoor activities meant that she was frequently exposed to conditions that would compromise her cleanliness and health. The sleeping arrangements in Elizabeth's palaces also affected hygiene practices. Beds were shared by multiple people, and bedding was changed infrequently due to the labor and expense involved. The Queen's own bed, while luxurious, was subject to the same limitations, and her sleeping chambers often harbored insects and accumulated odors, despite the best efforts of her servants. The storage and preservation of food in Elizabeth's era created additional hygiene challenges. The lack of refrigeration meant that food spoilage was common, and the methods used to preserve meat and other perishables often involved substances that would be considered unsafe by modern standards. The Queen's kitchens, despite employing skilled cooks and using the finest ingredients, operated under conditions that frequently compromised food safety. The water sources available to Elizabeth's palaces were often contaminated and unsafe for consumption or washing. Rivers and wells could be polluted by human waste, animal refuse, and industrial activities, making clean water a precious commodity. The Queen's household went to great lengths to secure safe drinking water, but washing and bathing often had to be done with water of questionable quality. The pest control methods used in Elizabeth's palaces were primitive and often ineffective, Rats, mice, and insects were constant problems that could not be easily eliminated with the techniques available at the time. The Queen's apartments, despite their luxury, were regularly invaded by various pests that contributed to sanitation problems and the spread of disease. The waste disposal systems used by Elizabeth's household created ongoing hygiene challenges. Human and animal waste, food scraps, and other refuse had to be managed through methods that often simply moved problems from one location to another rather than truly solving them. The Queen's palaces, magnificent as they appeared, were built on foundations of primitive waste management that affected the health and comfort of everyone who lived and worked there. The laundry practices of Elizabeth's era were labor-intensive and often ineffective at removing dirt and odors from clothing and linen. The harsh soaps and cleaning methods available could damage delicate fabrics, while the lack of hot water and effective drying techniques meant that items often remained damp and smelly even after washing. The Queen's vast wardrobe required an army of laundresses working constantly to maintain even basic cleanliness. The seasonal challenges faced by Elizabeth's household affected hygiene practices throughout the year. Winter brought problems with frozen water and inadequate heating, while summer created different challenges with insects, heat, and the rapid spoilage of food and other organic material. The Queen's residences had to adapt their hygiene practices to the changing seasons, often with limited success. The medical treatments available to Elizabeth for hygiene-related problems were often worse than the conditions they were meant to address. Skin problems caused by poor washing practices might be treated with harsh chemicals that caused additional damage, while dental issues were addressed through painful extractions that often led to infection. The Queen's faith in her physicians meant that she submitted to treatments that frequently made her condition worse. The diplomatic implications of Elizabeth's hygiene practices extended beyond personal comfort to matters of international import. Foreign ambassadors and visiting dignitaries often commented on the conditions they encountered at the English court, and these observations could affect political relationships and trade negotiations. The Queen's personal appearance and the cleanliness of her palaces were matters of state importance that required constant attention and management. As we draw near to the end of our gentle journey through the hygiene practices of Elizabeth's era, we can appreciate the enormous challenges faced by people living in the 16th century. The Queen, despite her wealth and power, was subject to the same limitations of knowledge and technology that affected all of her contemporaries. Her willingness to endure uncomfortable and often dangerous hygiene practices in service of her royal duties demonstrates the personal sacrifices required of Tudor monarchs. The legacy of Elizabeth's reign extends far beyond the hygiene practices that seemed so normal to her contemporaries but appear so shocking to modern observers. Her political achievements, cultural patronage, and personal charisma created a golden age in English history that continues to inspire admiration centuries after her death. The physical discomforts and health challenges she endured were simply the price of living in an era when medical knowledge was limited and hygiene practices were primitive. The servants, courtiers, and subjects who shared Elizabeth's world demonstrated remarkable resilience in adapting to conditions that would challenge even the strongest among us today. Their ability to create beauty, art, and political achievements despite the limitations imposed by poor hygiene and primitive medicine speaks to the adaptability and strength of the human spirit. The soft candlelight that illuminated their world also reveals their courage in facing challenges we can barely imagine. As we conclude our exploration of these fascinating but disturbing hygiene practices, we can feel grateful for the advances in medical knowledge and sanitation that have transformed human life since Elizabeth's time. The Queen, who ruled England with such distinction, despite subjecting her body to toxic makeup, primitive medical treatments, and poor sanitation, reminds us that human achievement can transcend even the most challenging physical circumstances. In the quiet twilight of our historical journey, we can imagine Elizabeth in her private chambers, surrounded by the soft glow of candles and the whispered conversations of her ladies-in-waiting. Despite the hygiene challenges that defined her daily life, she remained a formidable ruler whose intelligence, courage, and political skill created one of the most successful reigns in English history. Her story reminds us that true greatness can emerge even from the most unlikely and uncomfortable circumstances. The gentle night settles over our exploration of Tudor hygiene practices, carrying with it the wisdom that comes from understanding the past without judging it too harshly. Elizabeth's world, with all its challenges and limitations, produced art, literature, and political achievements that continue to enrich our own lives centuries later. As we drift towards sleep, we can appreciate both how far we have come and how much we owe to those who came before us. Enduring hardships we can barely imagine with grace and determination that continues to inspire us today. The education and upbringing of young Elizabeth had prepared her for many aspects of royal life, but nothing could have prepared her for the daily realities of maintaining royal appearance, while enduring the hygiene limitations of her era. From childhood, she was taught that her body was not merely her own, but belonged to England itself. Every aspect of her physical presentation, from her pale complexion to her elaborate clothing, was a political statement that required careful management despite the personal cost. The Princess Elizabeth, before she became queen, had already begun the dangerous practice of using lead-based cosmetics, under the guidance of her tutors and ladies. The young woman learned to sit perfectly still while servants applied the toxic white paint to her face, understanding even then that her natural appearance was insufficient for the role she was destined to play. These early experiences with dangerous beauty treatments established patterns that would continue throughout her 45-year reign. The transformation from princess to queen in 1558 brought new challenges to Elizabeth's hygiene routine. The increased public scrutiny meant that her appearance had to be flawless at all times, requiring even more frequent applications of the deadly ceruse and longer hours spent in the elaborate process of royal grooming. The young queen quickly learned that the price of maintaining her divine image was the systematic poisoning of her own body. The courtiers who surrounded Elizabeth during her early years as queen often remarked on her dedication to the demanding beauty routines required of royal women. Foreign ambassadors would write to their home countries, describing the English queen's ethereal pale complexion, never guessing that the beauty they admired was slowly killing the woman who wore it. The soft morning light that filtered through palace windows illuminated daily scenes of elaborate and dangerous beauty preparation that had become as routine as breathing. Elizabeth's first serious illness as queen, the smallpox that nearly claimed her life in 1562, provided a glimpse of what lay beneath the carefully constructed royal facade. When the fever stripped away her lid makeup and elaborate wigs, courtiers were shocked to see the damaged skin and thinning hair that years of toxic beauty treatments had already begun to cause. The young queen's recovery required weeks of even more intensive cosmetic work to restore her public image. The diplomatic marriages that Elizabeth considered throughout her reign were complicated by the hygiene realities of royal courtship. When foreign princes sent representatives to evaluate the English queen as a potential bride, elaborate preparations were required to present Elizabeth at her most attractive despite the physical damage caused by her beauty routine. The queen's ladies worked for hours before these crucial meetings, layering makeup and arranging wigs to create an illusion of perfect health and beauty. The famous portraits of Elizabeth that still hang in galleries around the world capture the success of these elaborate beauty preparations, showing a queen with flawless white skin and luxurious red hair. Yet these paintings also preserve evidence of the era's beauty standards, depicting the unnatural pallor that could only be achieved through the use of toxic cosmetics. Modern viewers, admiring these masterpieces, are actually looking at artistic representations of systematic self-poisoning elevated to the level of high art. The seasonal cycles that governed life in Elizabeth's palaces created additional challenges for maintaining royal hygiene standards. Winter months, when the queen spent more time indoors and social activities increased, required more frequent applications of makeup and more elaborate grooming routines. The cold weather that made bathing even more unpleasant also trapped odors and smoke within palace walls, creating atmospheric conditions that tested even the most creative approaches to personal cleanliness. Spring brought its own hygiene challenges, as the queen prepared for the traveling season and the elaborate progresses that took her court throughout the kingdom. These journeys, lasting weeks or months, required portable solutions to hygiene problems that were difficult enough to manage within the controlled environment of royal palaces. The Queen's ladies had to pack supplies of makeup, perfumes, and cleaning materials that could maintain royal standards under primitive travel conditions. The summer progresses that became a hallmark of Elizabeth's reign were triumphs of political theater that concealed extraordinary logistical challenges. The Queen, traveling with a court of hundreds of people, had to maintain her elaborate appearance while staying in accommodations that varied dramatically in their ability to support royal hygiene needs. Some noble hosts spent fortunes preparing their homes for the royal visit, while others struggled to provide even basic sanitation facilities worthy of their sovereign. The autumn return to royal palaces brought relief from travel hardships, but also required intensive restoration of the Queen's appearance after months of challenging conditions. Elizabeth's ladies would spend weeks working to repair the damage caused by summer travels, applying extra layers of lead makeup to restore the perfect pale complexion, and using increasingly elaborate wigs to compensate for hair damage caused by poor washing conditions during the progresses. The religious observances that punctuated Elizabeth's year added another layer of complexity to her hygiene challenges. The long church services required for major holy days tested the staying power of her lead-based makeup, while the fasting periods observed by the court could affect the Queen's health in ways that required additional cosmetic concealment. The intersection of religious duty and royal appearance created situations where Elizabeth had to endure physical discomfort in service of both spiritual and political obligations. The court entertainments that Elizabeth loved, including dancing, music, and theatrical performances, presented unique challenges for maintaining royal hygiene. The physical exertion required for these activities could cause the Queen's makeup to run or her elaborate hairstyles to become disheveled, requiring constant attention from her ladies to maintain the perfect royal appearance. The Queen learned to moderate her participation in physical activities to preserve the illusion of effortless royal beauty. The intimate relationships that Elizabeth formed with her courtiers were complicated by the hygiene realities of Tudor life. The Queen's famous relationships with men like Robert Dudley and Robert Devereux had to navigate the challenges of physical intimacy in an era when personal cleanliness was limited and body odors were a constant presence. The romantic idealization of these relationships in popular culture often overlooks the practical realities of courtship in a world without effective hygiene practices. The aging process, which affects all human beings, created particular challenges for Elizabeth as she attempted to maintain the youthful appearance expected of a virgin queen. As her natural beauty faded, she required increasingly elaborate and dangerous cosmetic treatments to preserve her public image. The lead-based makeup that had always been toxic became even more harmful as her aging skin became less able to tolerate its effects. The Queen's famous temper, which became more pronounced in her later years, may have been partially caused by the lead poisoning that resulted from decades of toxic makeup use. The mood swings and paranoia that characterized Elizabeth's final years could have been symptoms of heavy metal poisoning, though her contemporaries attributed these changes to the natural effects of age and the stress of ruling. The connection between her beauty routines and her mental health remained hidden until centuries after her death. The elaborate wigs that became increasingly important to Elizabeth's appearance in her later years represented both a solution to and a symptom of her hygiene problems. As her natural hair thinned and became damaged from years of toxic treatments, she relied more heavily on artificial hairpieces that were themselves difficult to maintain and often harbored insects and debris. The Queen's collection of red wigs became as famous as her natural hair had once been, creating an iconic image that concealed the physical damage beneath. The diplomatic implications of Elizabeth's declining appearance became more significant as she aged, and foreign courts began to comment on the obvious effects of her beauty routines. Ambassadors who had once praised the English Queen's ethereal beauty began to write more critically of her appearance, noting the artificial quality of her makeup and the visible damage to her skin and teeth. These observations, while kept from Elizabeth herself, influenced international perceptions of English power and stability. The medical treatments that Elizabeth's physicians prescribed for the problems caused by her hygiene routines often made her condition worse rather than better. When her lead-poisoned skin developed sores and infections, doctors would apply additional toxic substances in attempts to heal the damage. The Queen's dental problems, caused partly by her sugar consumption and poor oral hygiene, were treated with painful and dangerous procedures that often resulted in additional tooth loss and infection. The servants who maintained Elizabeth's elaborate beauty routines throughout her reign witnessed the gradual deterioration of their mistress's health while being powerless to suggest alternatives. These loyal women, many of whom served the Queen for decades, watched as the beauty treatments they helped to apply slowly poisoned the monarch they loved and served. Their discretion in keeping these observations private was essential to maintaining the royal image, but it also prevented any intervention that might have helped Elizabeth. The economic cost of maintaining Elizabeth's elaborate hygiene and beauty routines represented a significant portion of the royal household budget. The expenses associated with importing lead for makeup, purchasing exotic perfumes, and employing skilled cosmetic servants diverted resources that could have been used for other royal purposes. The Queen's commitment to maintaining her appearance, while politically necessary, came at a substantial financial cost to the English treasury. The technological limitations of Elizabeth's era meant that even the most expensive and elaborate hygiene solutions were primitive by modern standards. The Queen had access to the finest products and most skilled servants available, but these advantages could not overcome the fundamental lack of understanding about health and cleanliness that characterized the 16th century. Her wealth and status allowed her to suffer more expensively, but not more comfortably than her subjects. The social expectations that governed Elizabeth's appearance were so powerful that they overrode concerns about health and comfort throughout her reign. The Queen understood that her physical appearance was a crucial component of her political authority, and she was willing to endure considerable personal suffering to maintain the image required of a successful monarch. Her dedication to these standards, while personally costly, helped to establish and maintain English prestige throughout Europe. The legacy of Elizabeth's hygiene practices extended beyond her own lifetime to influence beauty standards and medical practices for generations of English women. The pale complexion that she made fashionable continued to be pursued through dangerous means long after the specific health risks of lead-based makeup became better understood. The Queen's example, both positive and negative, shaped cultural attitudes toward beauty and health that persisted well into the modern era. The romantic myths that have grown up around Elizabeth's reign often obscure the harsh realities of daily life in the Tudor era. Popular culture tends to focus on the glamour and excitement of court life, while overlooking the physical discomfort and health risks that characterized even the most privileged existence. The real Elizabeth, beneath the elaborate makeup and costumes, was a woman who endured considerable physical suffering in service of her royal duties. The archaeological evidence that has been discovered in Elizabeth's former residences provides physical confirmation of the hygiene challenges described in contemporary accounts. Excavations at royal palaces have revealed the remains of primitive sanitation systems, cosmetic containers, and medical implements that illustrate the conditions under which the Queen and her court lived. These discoveries help to separate historical fact from romantic fiction in our understanding of Tudor royal life. The medical knowledge that was available to Elizabeth's physicians, while extensive by 16th-century standards, was fundamentally flawed in ways that made effective treatment of hygiene-related health problems impossible. The theories of bodily humors and the fear of water that guided medical practice actually made many health problems worse rather than better. Elizabeth's faith in her doctors, while understandable given the limited alternatives available, exposed her to treatments that were often more dangerous than the conditions they were meant to address. The international context of Elizabeth's reign meant that her personal hygiene practices were observed and commented upon by representatives from courts throughout Europe and beyond. These foreign observers provided valuable contemporary accounts of English court life, but their reports were also influenced by their own cultural biases and political objectives. The descriptions they left of Elizabeth's appearance and habits must be interpreted carefully to separate reliable observation from diplomatic propaganda. The religious and philosophical beliefs of Elizabeth's era provided justification for hygiene practices that seem shocking by modern standards. The Christian emphasis on spiritual rather than physical cleanliness, combined with classical theories about the dangers of bathing, created an intellectual framework that supported practices we now know to be harmful. Elizabeth's acceptance of these beliefs, while personally costly, was consistent with the best knowledge available to educated people of her time. The artistic representations of Elizabeth that were created during her lifetime were carefully controlled to present an idealized image that concealed the reality of her physical condition. The Queen's painters worked closely with her cosmetic servants to ensure that portraits captured the artificial perfection achieved through lead-based makeup rather than the natural appearance beneath. These collaborations between artists and beauty professionals created images that were both artistically successful and medically misleading. The daily routines that governed life in Elizabeth's court were structured around the time-consuming requirements of maintaining royal appearance standards. The Queen's schedule had to accommodate the hours required for makeup application, the need for frequent costume changes, and the practical limitations imposed by elaborate clothing and hairstyles. The rhythm of court life was dictated as much by hygiene necessities as by political or social obligations. The psychological impact of Elizabeth's hygiene challenges on her personality and behavior remains a subject of historical speculation. The daily experience of applying toxic makeup, enduring painful medical treatments, and managing primitive sanitation may have contributed to the development of the formidable royal persona that became Elizabeth's trademark. The Queen's famous self-control and emotional discipline may have been partly shaped by her need to cope with constant physical discomfort. The technological innovations that began to appear during Elizabeth's reign, while not directly related to hygiene, demonstrated the potential for human ingenuity to solve practical problems. The improvements in navigation, printing, and military technology that characterized the Elizabethan age showed what was possible when human creativity was applied to overcoming limitations. The failure to apply this same innovative spirit to hygiene problems reflects the power of established medical and social beliefs to resist change. The economic and social changes that occurred during Elizabeth's reign created new challenges and opportunities related to hygiene and health. The growth of international trade brought new products and ideas to England, including some that would eventually improve hygiene practices. However, the conservative nature of medical and beauty traditions meant that these innovations were slow to be adopted, and Elizabeth continued to rely on practices that had been established long before her birth. As our gentle exploration of Elizabeth's world draws toward its close, we can reflect on the extraordinary courage and determination that enabled her to create one of history's most successful reigns, despite the physical challenges she endured daily. The Queen, who subjected her body to toxic makeup, primitive medical treatments, and inadequate sanitation, managed to project an image of divine authority that commanded respect throughout Europe and beyond. Her ability to transcend these limitations speaks to the power of human will and political skill to overcome even the most difficult circumstances. The lessons that Elizabeth's story teaches us about the relationship between personal sacrifice and public duty remain relevant today. Her willingness to endure physical discomfort and health risks in service of her royal obligations demonstrates the price that leadership sometimes demands. While we may question the specific practices she embraced, we can admire the dedication and selflessness that motivated her choices. In the quiet darkness that surrounds our historical journey, we can imagine Elizabeth in her final years, still maintaining the elaborate routines that had defined her adult life even as they continued to damage her health. The aging Queen, surrounded by loyal servants who helped her preserve the royal image that had become inseparable from her identity, represents both the triumph and the tragedy of a life lived entirely in service to public expectations. The gentle conclusion of our exploration brings with it a deeper appreciation for the advances in medical knowledge and hygiene practices that have transformed human life since Elizabeth's time. We can feel gratitude for the scientists, doctors, and innovators who have made modern cleanliness and healthcare possible, while also acknowledging our debt to historical figures like Elizabeth, who endured primitive conditions with grace and determination. As we settle into the peaceful rest that concludes our journey through Tudor hygiene practices, we carry with us images of a remarkable woman who created lasting achievements despite facing daily challenges that would test the strongest among us. Elizabeth's story reminds us that human greatness can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, and that the pursuit of excellence sometimes requires personal sacrifices that are invisible to those who benefit from the results. The soft whisper of history carries Elizabeth's legacy forward through the centuries, inspiring admiration for her political accomplishments while also teaching us about the importance of scientific progress and social change. Her reign, viewed from the comfortable perspective of our modern world, serves as both an inspiration and a warning about the price of maintaining power and prestige in any era. In the gentle twilight of our historical exploration, we bid farewell to the world of Queen Elizabeth I, carrying with us a deeper understanding of both the grandeur and the hardships that characterized one of history's most famous reigns.
The Queen, who ruled England with such distinction, despite enduring hygiene practices that seem shocking by contemporary standards, remains an enduring symbol of human resilience and political achievement that continues to inspire us across the centuries that separate her world from our own.